This is Sylvia. She is my best friend. Next week we will go to school together. Sylvia switched around and grabbed Esperanza's free hand. Esperanza looked down at Sylvia's dirty hands. Sylvia grinned up at her, and Esperanza's first thought was to pull her hand away and wash it as soon as possible. Then she remembered Mama's kindness to the peasant girl on the train and her disappointment in Esperanza. She didn't want Sylvia to start crying if she were to pull away. She looked around at the dusty camp and thought that it must be hard to stay clean in such a place. She squeezed Sylvia's hand and said, "I have a best friend too. Her name is Marisol, and she lives in Aguascalientes." Isabel introduced Esperanza to Irene and Melina, two women who were hanging clothes to dry on a long line stretched between the cabins and a tree. Irene had long gray hair tied in a tail. Melina didn't look much older than Miguel, and she already had a baby of her own. "We heard the story of how you came from Aguascalientes," said Melina. "My husband is from there. He used to work for Senor Rodriguez." Esperanza's face lit up at the news. "He knew my father since he was a boy. Do you think your husband knew Marisol, Senor Rodriguez's daughter?" Melina laughed. No, I'm sure he didn't. He was un campesino, a field servant. He would not know the family." Esperanza felt awkward and didn't mean to make Melina admit that her husband was a servant. But Melina didn't seem bothered, and again, recalling other farms her husband had worked on in Aguascalientes. Isabel pulled on Esperanza's arm. "We need to change the babies." As they walked back to the cabin, she said, "They are mother and daughter. They come over to talk and crochet with my mother all the time." "How do they know all about us already?" Isabel raised her hand and made her fingers tap up and down on her thumb as if a mouse was talking. "Everyone in camp knows each other's business." This is a good moment to pause if you need to, and then you can just note the time and come back. "Do you know how to change a diaper?" asked Esperanza when they got back to the cabin. "Certainly," said Isabel, "I will change them and you can rinse out the diapers. We need to do some laundry too." Esperanza watched as the young girl laid the babies down, one at a time, unpinned their diapers, wiped their bottoms clean, and pinned on fresh diapers. Isabel handed Esperanza the smelly bundles and said, "Take them to the toilets and dump them, and I'll fill the wash tub." Esperanza held them at arm's length and almost ran to the toilet. Several more onion trucks passed by, their smelling accosting her eyes and nose as much as the diapers. By the time she got back, Isabella had already filled 2 wash tubs with water from an outside pipe and was swirling soap around in one of them. A washboard was propped inside. Esperanza went to the wash tub and hesitated, staring into the water. Bits of onion skins floated on the surface of the soapy water. She held a corner of one of the diapers, lightly dipping it in and out of the water, her hand never getting wet. After a few seconds, she gingerly lifted the diaper from the water. "Now what?" she said. "Esperanza, you must scrub them like this." Isabel walked over, took the diapers, and plunged them into the water up to her elbows. The water quickly became murky. She rubbed the diapers with soap, vigorously scrubbed them back and forth on the washboard, and wrung them out. Then she transferred them to the next tub, rinsing and wringing again. Isabella shook out the clean diapers and hung them on the line, stretched between the chinaberry and mulberry trees. Then she started on the clothes. Esperanza was amazed. She had never washed anything in her life, and Isabel, who was only 8 years old, made it look so easy. Puzzled, Isabel looked at Esperanza. "Don't you know how to wash clothes?" "Well, Hortensia took everything out to the laundry quarters, and the servants, they always—" She looked at Isabel and shook her head no. Isabel's eyes got bigger and she looked worried. "Esperanza, when I go to school next week, you will be here alone with the babies and will have to do the laundry." Esperanza took a deep breath and said weakly, "I can learn. And later today you must sweep the platform." You do know how to sweep?" "Of course," said Esperanza. She had seen people sweep many times. Many times, she assured herself. Besides, she was already too embarrassed about the washing to admit anything else to Isabel. This is another place to pause if you would like. Note the time and come back. Isabel sat with the babies while Esperanza went to sweep the platform. The camp was quiet, and even though it was late in the day, the sun was unrelenting. She retrieved the broom and stepped onto the wooden floor. Dried and brittle onion skins were everywhere. In her entire life, Esperanza had never held a broom in her hand. But she had seen Hortensia sweep, and she tried to visualize the memory. It couldn't possibly be that hard. She put both hands near the middle of the broomstick and moved it back and forth. It swung wildly. The motion seemed awkward, and the fine dirt on the wooden planks lifted into a cloud. Onion jackets flew into the air instead of gathering together in a neat pile like Hortensia's. Esperanza's elbows did not know what to do. Neither did her arms. She felt streams of perspiration sliding down her neck. She stopped for a moment and stared at the broom as if willing it to behave. Determined, she tried again. She hadn't noticed that several trucks were already unloading workers nearby. Then she heard it. First a small tittering and then louder. She turned around. A group of women were laughing at her. And in the middle of the group was Marta, pointing. "La Cenicienta, Cinderella," she laughed. Burning with humiliation, Esperanza dropped the broom and ran back to the cabin. In her room, she sat on the edge of the cot. Her face flushed again at the thought of the ridicule. She was still sitting there, staring at the wall, when Isabel found her. "I said I could work. I told Mama I could help, but I cannot even wash clothes or sweep a floor. Does the whole camp know?" Isabel sat down on the bed next to her and patted her back. "Yes." Esperanza groaned. "I will never be able to show my face." She put her head in her hands until she heard someone else come into the room. Esperanza looked up to see Miguel, holding a broom and a dustpan. But he wasn't laughing. She looked down and bit her lip so she wouldn't cry in front of him. He shut the door, then stood in front of her and said, "How would you know how to sweep a floor? The only thing that you ever learned was how to give orders. That is not your fault. Anza, look at me." She looked up. "Pay attention," he said, his face serious. You hold the broom like this. One hand here and the other here. Esperanza watched. Then you push like this, or pull it toward you like this. Here, you try, he said, holding out the broom. Slowly, Esperanza got up and took the broom from him. He positioned her hands on the handle. She tried to copy him, but her movements were too big. Smaller strokes, said Miguel, coaching, and sweep all in one direction. She did as he said. Now, when you get all the dirt into a pile, you hold the broom down here, near the bottom, and push the dirt into the pan. Esperanza collected the dirt. See, you can do it. Miguel raised his thick eyebrows and smiled. Someday you just might make a very good servant. Isabel giggled. Esperanza could not yet find humor in the situation. Somberly she said, "Thank you, Miguel." He grinned and bowed. "At your service, mi reina." But this time his voice was kind. She remembered that he had gone to look for work at the railroad. "Did you get a job?" His smile faded. He put his hands in his pockets and shrugged his shoulders. "It is frustrating. I can fix any engine, but they will not hire Mexicans to lay track and dig ditches, not as mechanics. I've decided to work in the fields until I can convince someone to give me a chance." Esperanza nodded. After he left the room, Isabel said, "He calls you mi reina. Will you tell me about your life as a queen?" Esperanza sat on the mattress and patted the spot next to her. Isabel sat down. "Isabel, I will tell you all about how I used to live, about parties and private school and beautiful dresses. I will even show you the beautiful doll my papa bought me, if you will teach me how to pin diapers, how to wash, and—" Isabel interrupted her. "But that is so easy!" Esperanza stood up and carefully practiced with the broom. "It is not easy for me." That is where we will pause today. I remind you that the railroad that Miguel wants to work on is the same railroad that we were discussing in our lesson, the railroad, the transcontinental railroad that connected California to the East Coast. Okay, over and out.